So today we're going to learn how to elevate our coaching with all of this wonderful new Lionheart technology. It is a great way to give your members a little added bonus. We will learn the technology, the key metrics, the benefits, and why the zones change, how to personalize those zones and the metrics in the app for every member, how to coach effectively to optimize their zone, and how to monitor and improve heart rate recovery. So before we go into what's new, I want you guys to buy in to the technology of the heart rate. The picture on this slide is actually my studio from this past Saturday. And you can see that my studio has completely bought in because I am so invested in the heart rate monitor and what it can do for us. Coaches can better understand each individual's performance and progress, but it also helps to deepen your connection, showing members that coaches are invested in their personal goals and their achievements. The technology provides real-time data that helps coaches tailor their guidance to align with their members' specific goals during classes. When members feel that you care, that their progress is constantly monitored and supported, it increases their commitment to the program and to your individual studios. It also helps to celebrate the milestones based on measurable results, strengthening members' confidence and satisfaction with their fitness journeys. So the first metric we need to talk about is your resting heart rate. This is the number of beats per minute while at rest, reflecting baseline cardiovascular efficiency. The best time to take this number is first thing when you get up in the morning, taking 2 fingers and holding it on your artery in your throat. I suggest counting for 15 seconds and then multiplying that number by 4. Or you can take it with your 2 fingers in your wrist, but be mindful not to use your thumb. Your thumb also has its own heartbeat or pulse rate, so it will give you a skewed number. If you ever see your members using their thumb, tell them to use the 2 fingers next to that. So then we take your max heart rate. And if you see the example over to the right, it was just 220 minus your age. So if you were 35-year-old, your max heart rate would be 185. And then you got your zones based on a percentage of that. So if your heart rate was 130 during a workout, you would divide that by the 180, multiply it times 100. So at that point, at 130 beats per minute during your workout, you would be at a 70%. But that's not really accurate because it doesn't take into consideration your resting heart rate. And that has a lot to do with your heart rate reserve, which is a more accurate determination of how hard you're working. So now to calculate that max heart rate, they just take their age, multiply it by 0.07. So if they are 30, that would be 21. And then you're going to take the 220, which is using the Carbonin method, minus it by that 21, and your max heart rate is actually 199. This gives you more specific fitness testing results, so you can manually adjust those values in the app. Most of our heart rates now are going to be a percentage of your heart rate reserve. And your heart rate reserve is the difference between your max heart rate and your resting heart rate. And it's really easy to look at this like stairs. Your resting heart rate would be the bottom of the staircase, and your max heart rate would be the top of the staircase. Your heart rate reserve is all the steps in between that. So during different workouts, depending on how high your intensity is, like for a strength day or a recovery or a core exercise, you would probably only go up a couple steps, 1 or 2. But on your cardio days or some of those hybrid days, you might go all the way up to the top. So to be able to take your heart rate reserve, you want to use this formula. And this part of the formula, once you put in your resting heart rate and your max heart rate, is calculated for you. Some members just like to know this calculation. You would take your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate. If your max heart rate is 199 and you subtract 60, which would be your resting heart rate, you would get a 139. And then to get your heart rate reserve, you would take those numbers. If your heart rate during your workout was 145, you would minus your resting heart rate, which would give you 85. Then you are going to divide that by your heart rate reserve, which is 139, and then multiply that times 100 because it gives you a 0.61. And then so your new calculation in your zone would be 61. So if you see in the example, based on that person who is 135, you see now the big difference between being at a 70% to a more accurate number being at a 56%, which is a big difference. It was a little bit discouraging for some of my members in Bartram, and the cardiovascular system is functioning very well. They're very fit. 70% is not really accurate for them. So now it is a more accurate determination, and those members who always hung out at the bottom can now be closer to the top. So now let's understand our new heart rate zones. So obviously the colors and the zone numbers have changed. Zone 1 is dark blue. It's 50 to 60%. It is very light effort. It's kind of where you want to sit when you are walking into the studio. Then we go up to zone 2, which is now light blue. It is 60 to 70, a light effort, ideal for steady state activity and endurance building. For our lighter strength days where we're working more endurance. Then we move up to green, which is 70 to 80. Even if we're doing strength days, especially a hybrid day or some of our cardio days, we will hang out in this zone quite often. It is moderate effort where your anaerobic fitness has started to improve and your fat burning can peak. So then we go into zone 4, which is orange. It is high effort. You are pushing into those aerobic zones. You're getting a maximum calorie burn. And then we go to red, which is your max effort. And in that max effort, your heart rate and lungs are working at full capacity for short bursts of power. We do not want to hang out in this zone very long. It is for our hybrid days or our max effort when we do our sprint laps, when we do our 20-second sets, where we really want to give it our all, but then we want to really concentrate on getting that heart rate back down. So with our cardio, we want to aim for zones 3, 4, and 5. So that is about 80 to 95% of your heart rate max. We want to push our members to really get into that anaerobic threshold. And when we're talking about our anaerobic threshold, you are really challenging your oxygen system, which in turn can affect how well you work when you're not using oxygen. When we challenge your aerobic capacity, we are actually also improving your anaerobic capacity. So you are able to sustain those anaerobic sessions a whole lot longer by staying in those cardio zones. So then we also want to drop during our resting intervals to zone 1 and 2, so about 50 to 65%. If you are really healthy, your heart rate should be able to drop 10 to 20 beats during those recovery stations, especially in those hydration breaks. So now we're talking about hybrids, which requires different zones depending on which exercise focus we are in. So this is a great way to really give that one-on-one attention and to coach those members through each of your stations. This is really good when we're doing something like the Joker. I know in our studio, when we don't have capacity and we can keep all of our members in the cardio stations and then I'll switch all together into the strength, into the core, we can really use this to push them to be in the zones that we want them to during each of those exercises. My favorite workouts are hybrids. Joker is one of my favorite workouts. All right, so now we come to resistance. Just like in our hybrid, if we're doing a dynamic or a heavy lift, or we are emphasizing mechanical overload, we really want to stay in zones 2 and 3. When we get up into the zones 4 and 5, it is really easy to switch from fat burning into muscle burning. So if you see that your members are up there, really encourage that diaphragmatic breathing so we stay out of those zones. So now, why are these heart rate zones important and what is the benefit? So if we are doing our cardio workouts, we are all about improving that aerobic capacity and your cardiovascular endurance. And once you get into those higher zones, zones 4 and 5, you will push that anaerobic threshold, and it does help to increase that caloric burn. But the more time you spend in those intense aerobic intervals during HIIT training, it actually does help to increase your anaerobic threshold, which is your systems when you're not using oxygen. So it is a benefit not only to your cardiovascular system, but also to your muscular system when you work for a time in those higher zones. You don't want to stay in those higher zones for a very long time. It is a fine line because if you stay in those zones for too long, you do start burning your muscle as energy. So that's why when we do that any longer than a minute, you are switching into a different system when it comes to your anaerobic thresholds. So now with resistance workouts, we are obviously focusing on muscle building and mechanical overload while minimizing your cardiovascular strain. So we really don't want to get into those higher systems because we're not trying to work your heart as much. And then we want to drop down to the lower zones to aid in recovery. And this actually will optimize your strength gains. When you rest and you get your heart rate down, your body, when you go through a high intense interval, not only fatigues your muscle, your cardiovascular system, but it also affects your nervous system. And it gets into some of that lactic acid burning. If your anaerobic threshold is not very good, you get delayed onset of muscle soreness for a longer time, and it hits you a whole lot quicker. So if we can maximize and recover from those lactic acid burns, which is what a higher anaerobic threshold does, it makes your recovery a whole lot better. So we want to maintain that lower heart rate to focus more on stability and control and core strength without getting that excess fatigue. So that next set can be as effective as the prior set. So our hybrid workouts, again, we are all over the board when it comes to these. Staying in the right zone will ensure optimal energy utilization, preventing overtraining, and maximize your workout efficiency. All right, so now this is really important. This is where the coaching starts. Two things. First, when you get in the app, one, you need to make sure that the app is updated. If they update the app and they don't see this, they need to log out and log back in. And then you will click your picture in the top left, followed by the cogwheel in the top right, where you're going to click on Lionheart. And actually, the first thing I want you to do before you hit the heart rate is you're going to go to the biometric setting and adjust your biometrics. Pick your activity level. And this is not the activity level you want to accomplish in the studio. It is your activity level throughout your day. So it defaults to moderate. But if you are sitting at a computer all day long, you don't want to put it at moderate because that is not an accurate determination of the calories and the heart rate that you get throughout your day. If you're a construction worker or you're a plumber or a teacher, for instance, and you're on your feet all day long, you want to make sure that you adjust that accordingly. And now we are going to click that heart rate. You are going to get a current resting heart rate and then adjust your max heart rate. Based on all of that, it will then calculate your heart rate reserve on its own, and it will put you in the right zones based on your heart rate during your workouts. Also, you want to monitor this every couple months. As you get fitter and your cardiovascular system gets stronger, you will need to update these because your heart rate will change. Your resting heart rate will change, which means so will your max heart rate. So now how do we read the new reports? If you notice in this first picture, each of these, what they call candlesticks, represent 1 minute. And in that minute, you notice that the colors will change in the minute. It gives you your lowest record recording and your highest record recording for that minute. Then we go down here. This is where you can really personalize for your members. If a member has no clue how to work in the different zones, this is a great way to explain that to them. It gives you your average beats per minute, how long you were in each zone, especially right now that we are starting our challenge. These are a great way to get into those consultations with your members to really give them an added benefit. It is really good to look at these over the first half of the challenge to show them, especially if they're not really changing on the scale at this point. Some of them may just get discouraged because things aren't changing. This is a good way to show that just because the scale's not moving, their body is changing. So it is really important to approach this heart rate even before the class starts. If they walk into the studio and they turn that heart rate monitor on and they're in zone 1, they are ready. This is exactly where you want to walk into the studio. So if they come in zone 2, a lot of times this just could mean that they haven't drank enough water today, or they just downed their pre-workout. They could have had a stressful day at work. So we just need to be mindful of what's going on with each member. If they're in zone 3, find out if they've taken pre-workout or if they've just had caffeine or if they're dehydrated. If they're starting to get sick, a lot of times your heart rate will be elevated because your body's trying to fight something off. So these are just questions that you can ask. It also shows your members that you're concerned with them. They don't feel like just a number. And it really sets our studios apart from things like Orange Theory or Cycle Bar or all these other boutique studios that we are trying to compete with. If they come into the studio in zone 4, we really need to have some heart-to-hearts with them to figure out what is going on. This could mean they're sick. They could have an elevated blood pressure that day, unless their heart rate does start decreasing during the workout. If they come into the studio really stressed out or anxious, as they start working out, if it really is just a little bit of anxiety, their heart rate should decrease as the workout starts to release those endorphins and it helps them calm down a little bit. So that is something where you just need to be really mindful of where they are. Now, if they come in zone 5, yes, we have AEDs in the studio, but in my opinion, let's not have to use one. I really highly suggest explaining to members that it could be a detriment to their system if they come in and work out in a zone 5. Don't just let them go. If they do decide that what you say doesn't matter and they really want to work out, it is a really good idea to monitor them through the whole entire workout. But one thing I want to say about the Lionheart is this truly does work. I ran one time for my Spartan race last year, and all I did was follow the zone principles. Even with the old zones, I really stayed with them during my cardio workouts and really challenged myself to push through my aerobic challenges and my anaerobic challenges. And I got a PR on my Spartan. So if you buy in, your members will buy in, but I'm proof that this really does work. I did not train anything outside of doing my F45 workouts. And like I said, I got a PR, and I ran the super and the sprint in the same weekend, and I didn't feel fatigued, and I PR'd both of my races. So I know that this principle really does work. In my intros, we take a little bit of time before we normally would start the intro to go over what zones we want our members to be in. It really helps them to kind of get a good determination of the workout type, and where they should be if they have a heart rate monitor. So I tell all my members, like, today is a strength day, so we really want to concentrate on staying in zones 2 and 3. And I explain the colors so they can associate the color with where they need to be, because a lot of times they're just taking a quick glance at the TV and quickly they can see the color. And if they're not in that color, we can adjust accordingly. So we really want to encourage our members to reach the target zones for maximum calorie burn. Use those rest intervals to really bring those heart rates down to zones 1 and 2, and really encourage deep breathing to lower that heart rate. So now we are going into those resistance training workouts. We want to keep our heart rates between zones 1 and 3. It's all about tearing down those muscles to build them back bigger and stronger. We do want to encourage brief peaks, and I mean brief, into zone 4 for those dynamic strength exercises like our deadlifts, our heavy bent over rows, and our chest press from today. Especially during our progressive overload workouts, we really want to encourage those nice deep breaths to get that heart rate down, because we want them to go up in weight on that next set. Then for our hybrid workouts, touch on that one-on-one. Tell them that, hey, we're doing a cardio zone next. This is what I want you to push for. Don't be afraid to go up and adjust weight if somebody is lifting too heavy and their heart rate zone is a little bit higher than we want them, encourage them to focus more on form, range of motion, and decrease their heart rate just a little bit. So diaphragmatic breathing to get your heart rate down to a level that is desirable. You want to encourage them to fill their stomach. So your stomach will actually poke out. So it looks like you got a little bit of a bread loaf there. And you want to inhale deeply through the nose for a count of 4. And then exhale nice, slow, and controlled through your mouth for 6 to 8 seconds and let that hand go back down. You want to repeat this until your heart rate drops into that desired zone. Really encourage your members to focus on this controlled breath work during transitions and your rest intervals to get that heart rate down. When it comes to your heart rate recovery, it should vary. Your body really wants to be in homeostasis, so it tries really hard to get to that normal resting state during rest periods and after your workout. A good way to test this is to do a 1-minute test. So say after a workout, if you have the cool downs going on, have everybody take their heart rate for a minute to see how quickly it drops. And like I said, track that heart rate trend over time and really celebrate that progress with those members. As a member becomes fitter, their resting heart rate will decrease and their heart rate zones will shift. So this is a great way to monitor their progress. Regularly updating this in the app is very crucial. If you don't adjust those zones, the intensity of their workouts are not accurate based on what their goals are. So I highly recommend that every 2 to 3 months or after a significant fitness milestone, after our challenges, when we're really pushing them, to really get into that app and adjust that as need be. The faster your heart rate drops post-workout, the better your conditioning is. Post-workout, we want it to drop 20 to 30 beats after that first minute of the workout being over. So when you are doing that cool down, if you have those turned on, by the time that cool down is over, you should be at a decrease of those 30 beats per minute as you're walking out of the studio. So it is really good idea to encourage your members to compare workouts. So Athletica versus Athletica, Romans versus Romans, what Athletica was today versus what Athletica was when we did it in the last phase or 3 phases ago, because it will really show a good determination of your change. A lower heart rate at the same intensity shows that your heart is running more effectively, and it indicates an improved fitness. There is one caveat to this, though. I have asthma, and I think I'm pretty fit, but my resting heart rate is normally high. If you notice that somebody's resting heart rate is super low, or if their resting heart rate is really high, sometimes medication like beta blockers can really affect what their resting heart rate is. We have members that take blood pressure medicine and they're working their butt off, but their heart rate is only at 100, and everybody else in the studio on a cardio day is like 140, 150. So you really have to be concerned with those things. Monitor those resting heart rates, which is another reason why assessing what their resting heart rate is as they come into the studio is so important. Your resting heart rate will decrease over time if you're just an average fit individual, because the stronger your heart pumps, the more blood with each heartbeat reduces the overall workload that your heart needs to do at rest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. This is all really helpful information. When it's part of your culture at your studio, it just increases the full member and community experience that much more. New people who come in and see everybody's got that Lionheart, I want one, that really contributes to that element of inclusivity. And just like Kelly was saying, that individualized aspect of group fitness, so that people don't just feel like a number. They feel like they're really getting that one-on-one attention.